Hello everyone and welcome to NFLGirlUK Meets. I'm Bhandari and this is a show that brings you closer to the game you love. Joining me this week is Henry Hodgson, Vice President of International Marketing and Fan Development at the NFL. Henry and I talk about his career within the league, the growth of the sport here in the UK, plus his thoughts on what's needed for a UK franchise. Welcome to the show, Henry. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Liz. How are you doing?
Really
times
well.
that we're living in.
But, very strange times. How are you finding it?
It's been interesting. Obviously, everyone working from home and balancing that. I've got 3 kids here, so they are all trying to carry on their education from home as well. So it's been, we're about 3 weeks into it now.
Yeah, got your hands full.
Yeah, exactly. But all good. Thank you.
Glad to hear that, and thanks for taking the time out in all of this to speak to me today. Now, you've worked at the NFL since 2003 in a variety of roles. How did the opportunity to work at the NFL come around?
Well, yeah, so 2003 was when I first had a full-time job for the NFL, but I've actually worked for them on and off since 1996. Or wow. Even before that. I'll try and tell the whole story and then we can work it out together because I'm not sure I could even remember it so far back in the distance. I grew up loving the NFL. Grew up in the 80s when football sort of first came on TV and Channel 4. My dad had worked and lived in the US, so when it first came on TV in the UK, he at least had a bit of a grounding in the sport and kind of understood what was going on. So I think he was excited that it was on TV as well. So as a little kid, 5-6 years old, I would sit with him and watch Channel 4's NFL coverage and fell deeply in love with the sport and especially with the Miami Dolphins, which has been haunting me ever since. But when I was, I guess, 16 or 17 at school, we had to do some work experience. And I think my peers sort of wound up, going in for a day in the office of their dad or whatever. And I wrote to the NFL, which had just opened an office in London, and said, can I come and do something and come and work for you, for a week or whatever. And bizarrely, it was when the American Bowl games were still being played, so preseason games in Europe, and they were playing one in Berlin, as well as a European Youth Championships, and said, come and work for us there, get some experience working for us there. So my very first experience was the New York Giants and San Diego Chargers played a game in Berlin at the Olympic Stadium. And as I said, at the same time, the European Youth Championships were taking place. And I worked with the NFL for, I think, a week or 10 days in Berlin that summer, which was really cool and got me my first opportunity to work for them. Then after that, NFL Europe was around. I worked for the London Monarchs on game days, and I guess that would have been the 1995 season. So I think the Germany thing was probably 1994 or even 93. Then the London Monarchs on game days in 1995, and then I took a year off between school and university and worked for the London Monarchs for that most of that year. My job was to look after William Perry, the fridge, who came and played for the London Monarchs that season. And so I was the fridge's PR person, and actually the guy who hired me then, gentleman named David Tossell, who still works in the NFL office in London, heading up the PR group. So I'd known him since that time, and we basically started about the same time with the London Monarchs then. And then I went off to university, and then Dave rehired me in 2003, which is when I sort of first started working for them full time, if you like, as opposed to some of this sort of freelance internships or whatever else. And went there. I'm sorry, this is a long story because
I love it.
It's a long time, but went there, and so my job with initially in 2003 was running digital media for NFL Europe, which essentially meant running the website for NFL Europe, which was both kind of keeping it up and running, but then also providing content for it and working on that, which was really interesting and really fun. And got to experience a lot with NFL Europe, traveling around to games and everything that was involved in covering that league. And then that evolved to NFL UK, I suppose, as NFL Europe went away. So that takes us to about 2007, and then the London Games came about, and then well, I'll stop there and then I moved to the US. But I'll stop there if you have any questions about that whole decade.
No, do you know what? This is all just fascinating. I don't want to stop you in the middle of your flow, so no, go for it.
So then, I'd been working at NFL UK / NFL Europe from between 2003 2010. It was a wonderful experience. Working with a lot of people who are still involved in that office, and under Alistair Kirkwood, who's been a great kind of mentor and friend during my NFL time, and then got an opportunity to come and work here in LA in a role that was essentially responsible for content programming for NFL.com and then the other NFL media platforms, so NFL Mobile and the connected TV apps and all those kind of things. I had that role, which was, again, really exciting and really fun and very different from being in the UK team until 2016. And then honestly, the sort of itch to continue with NFL International, especially as that had evolved in the 5 or 6 years since I'd last been there, and we were expanding into other territories and that kind of thing, was pretty strong. And so got an opportunity to come back to work for NFL International, and in my current role where I'm responsible for marketing and fan development for NFL International. So that takes us up to the present day. I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time telling that story, but unfortunately it's a long one, which I think probably dates me pretty badly. But there you go.
No, I like that. It sounds like you've had a really interesting career, and to be an NFL fan too, that's really cool. And more so, you've been involved in things like the International Series since day one. You must feel so proud to have seen that grow into what it is today.
Yeah, I really am. I mean, it is amazing. I think anyone who's been involved as a fan of the sport in the UK knows that there's that sort of fervent fan base in the UK. But I think, even going back to 2003, when I first started full time with the NFL, if you'd said that there would be games in London, even, it would have been like, oh, that seems a bit fanciful. And yet 4 years later, that happened. And then now there are multiple games in multiple stadiums, and, conversation about franchises and everything. And I think, the biggest change that's happened over that time is nothing seems fanciful. It feels like it's a movement. The fan base is definitely growing, and we can see that the audience for TV, etc., is growing. So I'm proud to be part of that fan base and to have been a little bit of the growth as well, and see how it's evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fan base has grown and evolved too. How difficult is it when it comes to marketing to new fans? You've seen moments on social media, and particularly the NFL UK account, where posting something to appeal to a new audience is then, I guess, something that then frustrates hardcore fans who already know the game inside out.
Yeah, it is. It's a good thing to call out. I think it is hard to balance that, and we try our best. You're never going to be able to keep everyone that happy. I think I think of it a little bit in terms of kind of an education. Where social media is at the start of that. It's sort of preschool, primary school kind of get you into the sport. I think, and this is certainly my experience, is the more you begin to love the game, and I think it's a sport that kind of unpeels like an onion. There's so many layers to it. Once you like a player, then you like a team, then you kind of really get into the sport itself, and then you find all the nuances within the sport and strategy and everything that comes with that, and then the soap opera that happens around the sport, whether it's players or coaches moving or all that kind of thing. It takes you deeper and deeper. I think at some point you kind of find your own path. So the way I think of the NFL UK social channels as an example is that's probably where we're guiding you and helping you learn. And then at some point, like anything, if you fall in love with it enough, you're going to take that education upon yourself and find your own routes, whether it's, in this case, who covers the team best, whether it, newspapers or local bloggers or whatever, or podcasts or whatever it might be. And that's when you take it on yourself, and to some extent you kind of leave that guide behind you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're really focused on, trying to bring new fans to the sport and trying to make it accessible. And that, I think, is what the goal of a lot of the marketing activities, at least at the kind of high level, are for the UK and then for the other markets that we work on.
Yeah, I can appreciate that one. Now, you are part of many areas. How much involvement have you had in the NFL Academy that launched in September last year?
A little bit. I mean, certainly, looking again at their social media strategy and working with them a bit on that, and then some of the players from the NFL that we've managed to come and sort of have them be ambassadors for the academy. But that's one of those things that I think it's a huge step forward for the sport in the UK. One of the things we do is a lot of research into fandom around the world, but across the globe, actually, one of the common themes is it's easier to fall in love with the sport if there's a local hero. And we've really tried to develop those through the International Player Pathway Program and various other programs. But the way in is really to get that sort of feeder system into college football. And I think that's what the academy, to some extent, is designed to be. And again, credit to Alistair Kirkwood and the team at the UK office who've had this in mind for a while, I think. And certainly it's been a project that, I remember even when I was back in the UK office, we've sort of explored, but now was the right time to do it. And I think they've done a fantastic job of not just the football side of it, but then actually for those kids, the education, the sort of social direction that they're helped with. And I think the program's great. And then from a football perspective, Tony Allen, who's the head coach there, who again is a guy who's been involved in football in the UK for decades, and is a fantastic coach and a fantastic kind of mentor for young kids. He's been involved in some of the London British American Football League teams over the years, and he's just a great guy, and he'll do a wonderful job not just of coaching those guys, but of kind of helping them evolve into great people.
Yeah, and as fans, it's nice to have been involved in that process. You'll regularly see it covered, and it's just, it's great to see these international players get involved and helping with it all too.
The hope is, whether it's this year or next year, as they, continue bringing people into the program, one day one of those guys that you're looking at on social media and seeing them practice and play, etc., is going to be in the NFL. And I think that would be really exciting for everyone in the UK to be able to say that, look, that's one of our people. Because I think, there's so many guys that, the FA Obadas, the Jayajais, all the players we talk about, but to some extent, we haven't seen their story up until that point. Really getting a window into every step that they've had to take to get there, I think will be revealing in terms of what it means to make it to the NFL and how difficult it is, how much work goes into it.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, in a moment, we're in strange times with coronavirus, but all going well. The new season will kick off in September. But I have heard rumours about the season, obviously if things aren't, that it could get pushed back to, say, November. How much of an impact would something like that have on, the international series?
I mean, I think if that happened, obviously it would have an impact. Honestly, right now, the planning, as you saw earlier this week from the NFL, is that the season, we're planning on it going ahead, as expected in September. And with the international games taking place, as they would do. But I think, as you've seen with this whole virus, and I'm certainly not a professional in any sense around that, but it's evolved, on a daily basis in terms of what, how things will happen. So, and September is a long way off. So I think, that it will be, that's how we have to look at things, is make the assumption that things are going ahead as planned. But certainly there are other contingency plans being developed that anyone in any business should or would be doing right now.
Absolutely. And obviously the game grows here in the UK year on year. Given your knowledge and I guess on your own opinion as well, what do you think the UK needs to do in order to get a franchise?
I think a lot of what the UK needs to do has sort of already been demonstrated. I think, being able to support games, clearly, now that there are 4 games a year in the market, that shows that, and they're all, sold out games, or they have been up until now. has been one of the things that people were looking for. I think there were some logistical hurdles that we had to get over with regards to different stadiums, which obviously Tottenham came in last year, and that's a fantastic facility, and Wembley is as well. So we've got two great stadiums that could support teams. This year, there's going to be the experimentation with the Jags playing two games, which I think will be interesting as well. So, a lot of those kind of hurdles. I think the other hurdles, quite honestly, had been related to the CBA, which has now been signed, and some issues around that. Some of the other things are truly logistical ones, and I think the commissioner's brought this up before, around just trying to work out how you could make it fair, for example, for a playoff team, and suddenly potentially a playoff game being hosted in the UK, and at short notice another team having to arrange to fly into London and play games there, or around free agents, and could you make sure that there was a sort of competitive balance for a London club being able to sign free agents, or during the season work players out and then bring them in to replace anyone that got injured. So some of those things I think are not like, hey, UK fans, you need to sort this out. I think the passion that's being demonstrated by the UK fans is incredible, and I don't think there are any question marks in terms of would UK fans, or is there enough passion for the sport in the UK? I think some of the hurdles are probably those other things. In the meantime, it's fantastic that we get to watch 4 games in London and see multiple teams coming and playing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from your experiences when you've been obviously over in London for the games, you've met legends like Dan Marino and spent a huge amount of time with him. What's your experience been like around that? Like, who've been, I guess, the people you've met that have really like stuck with you?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, certainly met, and I guess 10-year-old me would be like, wow, how did that happen? And a lot of those guys, they're interesting. Even going back to when I was working in the UK office, used to obviously look after some of the players that would come over, whether it was for promotional visits around games or whatever. So, Jason Taylor is one that sticks out. I'm a Dolphins fan, so it was awesome to spend some time with him, and he was a great guy. Alex Smith might be one of the nicest people I've ever met. Forget about NFL players, and spent a week with him, and still have kind of on and off stayed in touch with him since then. The ones that actually have stuck with me the most, and where my kind of passion really lies, is the international players. It's the likes of FA, Moritz Böhringer, some of the guys that have been in the International Player Pathway program that I've had the opportunity to work with, and the NFL players are, it's like, well, that's that guy in real life, but actually getting to know the guys that have come from our program around the world, whether it's Brazilian players or Mexico or the UK or Germany, their stories are ones that are closer to my world in terms of what they've had to do to make it to the level they've got to. For the likes of Alex Smith, he was the best high school player, and then the best college player, and then an NFL player, and so that's that pathway. Certainly not to diminish anything he achieved, but that pathway was, FA was, streets ahead of anyone else in playing football in the UK, probably, although he did it for a very short period of time. But then the journey he went on prior to that, which is obviously incredible, but then within the NFL to get to where he's got to now, that really is something that sticks with me. And so hearing, spending time with those guys, I really appreciate their time and their friendship to the extent that exists as well.
Yeah, definitely. I've been lucky to speak to a couple of them. Christian Scotland Williamson, he was such a nice guy when I spoke to him.
He's a wonderful guy, yeah.
Yeah, and just like the way he talks about things, you just know that like this is his dream, and it's so lovely to kind of like hear that from like players, because again, it's just not something you would ordinarily get to hear.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Liz, actually an interesting one. So just recently, there's some International Player Pathway programs players in the program right now, or there was until unfortunately they had to go home for the same reason that you and I are at home today. They were training in Florida, IMG. But Scott Pioli, who was the former Patriots general manager and Chiefs general manager, and well-respected football administrator, I guess, has been working with us on the program this year. And he sent a note. I probably know that maybe this is supposed to be a secret, but I'm happy to share it. He sent a note about a week ago, just when they had left the program, and just said, I want to tell everyone how amazed I am by the program. This was his first year being part of it, and how the players that are involved, how their stories have really affected me. And he basically said in this email that it reminded him why he fell in love with football, that the stories and the passion of the players and the effort that they'd made to get to where they got to, and that the fact that this is sort of a dream making opportunity for them, was something that kind of really, like, for him, he said it really hit hard and actually brought him back to what the roots of why he loves the sport. And I think that really resonated with me. We produced a program which you can find on YouTube called NFL Undiscovered, that follows these guys each year. And that's really our goal with that, is to sort of tell the story of where they've come from and where they're trying to get to, and the work that goes into doing that. But it was pretty cool that it resonated with someone like him, who's been obviously around Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and whoever else in the NFL, but that this was the thing that reminded him why the sport's so special.
That's such a lovely story.
Yeah, it was cool.
Oh, now, whenever I've listened to Around the NFL, where you've been a guest, they refer to you as Handsome Hank. What's that about?
Yes. There's a gentleman at NFL Media called Dave Damashek, who is a podcaster himself. And when I first met Dave, when I first moved to the US, he decided to bestow that nickname on me. Certainly not self-given, certainly not used outside of that world. But yeah, that's where it comes from.
And final question, this is actually from my good friend Neil Dutton. He wondered if your opinion on pretzels has altered over the years. You might want to give some context on that one.
Yeah, so my opinion on pretzels is that they're just stale bread. And Neil, I think he says his opinion is that he likes stale bread, I believe is his exact quote. So he likes pretzels. I actually, 2 years ago, when the game in Mexico between the Chiefs and Rams was cancelled, unfortunately, I obviously didn't go to Mexico, and because I'm based in LA and because the game was relocated to LA, got given tickets to go to the game. And so I took my son, who at the time was 8 or 9 years old, and my parents, who happened to be in town as well. And we went to the Rams game. And obviously that was 54-51, I think it ended up. And one of the better games of the last probably 10, or most memorable games, at least, of the last 10 years. And was in the stadium, halftime, wanted something to eat. And the only thing available was pretzels. So I did think in that moment of Neil and of my quote about pretzels. My son was starving, as 8-year-old boys tend to be. So I said, okay, let's get a pretzel. And they asked, do you want salt on it or not? And I didn't know whether I wanted salt on it or not. But I was like, okay, well, maybe traditionally you're supposed to have salt on it, and it tastes so bad normally. Maybe salt will improve it. They doused it in, more salt than you've ever seen in your life. And you take a bite, and then you're like, now I'm incredibly thirsty, which I think is their goal, is to make you as thirsty as you can be, so you go back and get a drink. And so, no, in fact, my opinion of pretzels, if anything, since I last spoke to Neil about this, has gone downhill. Not a fan of pretzels, not going to be a fan of pretzels. I can't imagine there's a way to make pretzels taste good.
Amazing, Henry. It's been real fun speaking with you. Thanks again for taking the time to share your story.
It's been great speaking to you as well, Liz, and congrats on everything you do in the UK. I think you're one of the leading lights in terms of the fans that's sort of, helping other fans get into the sport. So I appreciate everything you do too.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with Henry. It was great to hear how he worked his way through the ranks in the NFL and about his experiences and memories along the way. Join me next time when I speak to Brendan London, former wide receiver and both Super Bowl and Grey Cup champion. Until then, thanks for listening.